Hello, folks. You are listening or viewing the Deal by Me podcast. This is where we ask guests to tell us your story. Your story can be encouraging, inspiring, and very transforming. Today, I have with me Sonja Keefe, who is an international Amazon best-selling author, speaker, podcaster, and consultant. She has quite a bit to share with us today, and I ask that you will just allow her to share, and we will get into a great conversation following uh, her sharing about her background, a little bit about where we're coming from, and then we will talk. Sanjay, again, it's good to have you with me today. Uh, will you kind of share with the listeners where you are coming from this morning and where you've been interviewed from, and a little bit about yourself, and then we're going to get into some good conversations.
Absolutely. Well, hello, everyone. James, thank you so much for having me today on your show. As he stated, my name is Sonja Keefe, and I am originally from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, born and raised, and I currently reside in Fredericksburg, Virginia. And I am excited to be here because I just absolutely love meeting new people and connecting to amazing audiences. And this is a brand new year. And so I'm just honored to be in this space and on the show with you today.
Well, thank you so much. I've had the opportunity to just uh, view and read a little bit about you, and it's just
Mhm.
so exciting about what you're doing. I know that you are a wife, a mentor and leader in your community, and of course, just done so much. You are a podcaster, speaker. What is it that you haven't done? It's just amazing when I look at your bio. Uh, having looked at your bio, I am a little curious about your business and what you do. I know you're an author. I know you're
Mhm.
a speaker. You are a podcaster
Yes.
and a consultant, but you're also a wife, mother, mentor, and leader in your community. How you balance all of that?
Honestly, it's priority, what I actually choose to prioritize. For many, many years, I let life kind of lead me in the directions that I chose to go to. And as I've gotten older, I've learned that I had to kind of flip that around because prior to that, I was always in overwhelm, always trying to do the next thing. As a mother, I have two children who are now adults. But their schedules led me when I was a wife, not when I was a wife, I am a wife. And so, making sure that the house was taken care of and making sure, my husband had what he needed. Those things I always put first. And now that I've gotten older, I realize, we've got to start with yourself first. And that's not selfish, because I've always say when you always are giving so much to others and you never start with yourself, you can never pour from an empty cup. So now I have learned that my life now revolves around the things that I enjoy and the things that bring me joy. And so when I start from that place, I have found that I have more peace because now I'm doing the things that I love doing. And now it fills me up so that I can now pour into those that I love the most.
Well, I think that's very admirable. Um, I'm also just curious about your corporate work. I know that you had a third corporate layoff. Was that
Mm-hmm.
just something about uh, the job that you couldn't felt good about fulfilling? And I guess I'm just curious about uh, why were you laid off? What was the reasons behind this? I know listeners are going to be very curious about a lot of things that you are saying this morning, and I'm just trying to get it out on the table, and so we
Mm-hmm.
can discuss it all. Okay.
Okay, absolutely. Well, my career started in accounting and finance. I got my undergraduate degree from Strayer University as an adult learner, and during my bachelor's of science degree in accounting. And my initial dream was to own my own CPA firm. But over the years, I got burnt out in the industry, working the long hours and trying to raise a family and keep that part of my life together, that I pivoted and got into the mortgage industry. My first layoff actually happened in 2008 when the economy crashed. And at that time, I couldn't even get a job as an accountant because the world was so different. And so a recruiter reached out to me and talked to me about the mortgage industry. And at the time, I didn't even own my own home yet. So I was wondering, like, how could I thrive in this environment? And my auditing background and accounting background transferred very well into the field of mortgages and helping homeowners to, own their own homes. And while that industry has always kept me employed for probably the last, I say 10, 15 years, just like with any job and with any industry, there are ebbs and flows. And so I found myself experiencing multiple layoffs, like going from one bank to another, one mortgage company to another. And I just moved, as the time shifted. And the last layoff for me was actually January of 2022. And even though I was in that industry for quite a long time, I still felt like I was called to do more. And while I absolutely appreciate the experience and what it did for me, I just never felt fully fulfilled in that arena. And when the third layoff for me happened in 2022, and it was due to the industry changing, as interest rates increased, people weren't refinancing their homes, and with people losing their jobs or being laid off or downsized, people weren't buying homes, so it affects the industry at that time. And so because of the layoff, it really pushed me and purposed me to find and build my own business. And so since 2018, when I launched my podcast show, that was really for me the beginning of really figuring out how to build a side business while I was working in corporate America. And by the grace of God, it led me to finally close that chapter in my life in corporate America on July 21st, 2022. And I went full time into building my business now called Sisters with a Voice Podcast Network.
Wow. What a story, Sonja. It's a real story. I've had lots of individuals on my podcast since I began. And obviously I'm a podcaster, and I never asked this question. I guess it's because I am a podcaster, but I'm going to ask you because it's interesting. You've left corporate business and now you are full time into podcasting, and that may be some people listening to this podcast who may have the thought of going into podcasting. Can you share how they can become a podcaster? I've never asked that question before, but I do want to ask you that question.
Absolutely. Well, I always tell people, if you have an expertise or there's things that you share all the time or questions that people always ask you, it's always a good segue into starting a podcast. But to start a podcast, the first place I always tell people to start from is asking yourself, why is it that you want to start a podcast? Because for everybody, that reason is going to be different. For me, I created my podcast show back in 2018 because I wanted to offer a platform for women to be able to share their voice and to have a stage and a place where it was a safe space, but that they could share their expertise. Because when I got into the business of podcasting, I was really floored at the amount of how many women were really not in this space. Like James, men were already doing this. Men had already been in podcasting because they really saw how they could leverage it to not only showcase their expertise, but it created businesses for them or gave them more visibility around what they did. But for women, you know, we wear so many hats, and I always say we overanalyze everything. And so many women felt like, well, I don't have a story to tell. I don't know if people would want to hear what I have to say. And when I created my platform, I didn't even know what the show was going to be called. I just knew that I wanted to kind of interview other people. So if you're someone that's like, you know, I really asked the question, like, what could you possibly talk about for like 20 minutes? And people could come up with a myriad of topics that they could talk about. So when you start from a place of why you want to start the podcast, then ask yourself, what could you share that could help somebody to be able to either solve their greatest problem or to help pursue their greatest passion? And when you start from that place, that can be the foundation for you to build and start your own podcast.
Well, interesting because you've helped me really because that's exactly what I was trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
I pastored, just retired at the end of last year, December, from
Okay.
my church where I pastored for almost 32 years, same
Mm-hmm.
church here in Durham County, and I was trying to figure out what am I going to do when
Mm-hmm.
I retire from the pastorate because I wanted to stay busy. I wanted to
Yeah.
continually do ministry. So
Mm-hmm.
I thought about doing something where I could hopefully encourage,
Mm-hmm.
inspire, and hopefully transform some lives.
Yeah.
That's the reason I started the Deal by Me podcast. So
Yeah.
to hear you say that helps me right now because I was not sure, but I feel pretty
Yeah.
I feel
Yeah.
pretty confident about what I'm doing now. And so in the process of that, I always wanted to ask my guests, uh, what is it about your experiences or the events in your life that you feel could help somebody else? Uh, and also, how have these experiences and events uh, in your life help you in your daily challenges? Can you
Great.
kind of talk about that a little bit?
Yep. Great question. Well, I can definitely say my life experiences of falling down and getting back up. I want to encourage somebody because perhaps you have experienced a job loss, or perhaps a loss of a loved one, or perhaps you're sitting there trying to figure out, you know, how can I have more impact in my life? And I thought before launching my podcast, I felt the same way. Like nobody wants to hear my story. Like being laid off from corporate America, you know, this happens to people every day. But I discovered when I went around the world and sharing my story, I would have women who would walk up to me and say, your story inspired me that the layoff is not a death sentence, that I could still find purpose even in the midst of my pain. Because when I got laid off the first time in 2008, you know, it was a shock to the system. But at that time, everybody's at that moment felt like was experiencing the same thing. It was the second layoff that happened for me in 2015 that really broke my soul, because at that time I was raised that you go to college, you get a good job, you work for X amount of years, and you retire. And so I equated every corporate job that I had and every promotion, I equated position to power. And when the job was taken from me, I didn't know who I was at my core. And I went, I was really lost, and I felt like a failure to my family. And I really had to do some deep soul searching. And it wasn't until I went on a 40-day fast where I really went to God and I asked him, like, what is my purpose in life? Because I thought it was the jobs, and now the job is taken from me. Who am I? And he had to remind me who I was in Christ. And at the end of that 40-day fast, he birthed in me walk in love. And I was out of Ephesians 5:2. And I was like, what does that have to do with the loss and what I'm experiencing? And he showed me, and the Holy Spirit showed me that I want you to demonstrate my love out in the world. And so I created a t-shirt line, and it was called Walk in Love to Creations, because at that time I was on social media and I was posting inspirational messages. And at the end of the message, I would say hashtag walk in love. And so when I created that hashtag on a t-shirt and I walked out in the world, people would either walk past me and say, not enough of us do this, or they would stop me and say, what does walk in love mean? What's the story behind that? And so I began to share how working in corporate America, I'd been at that company for 5 years. And for me, that was monumental because I was accustomed to job hopping every 2 years because I was chasing the money. And to be somewhere for 5 years, that was like, oh my God, okay, I'm somewhere for 5 years. I envisioned me retiring from there. And when I got the call that my job was being eliminated, I asked, well, could I at least say goodbye to my colleagues, who many of them had become family for me over that 5-year period, only to be told, you've got 5 minutes to get your things and go. And so to have that snatched from me, I was like, you know what? I never want to be in that position where man has control over my destiny. And so that really catapulted me to start the t-shirt line, to tell the story. And when I started telling that story, I started inspiring other women that, listen, your job title is not your story, that God has created you for such a time as this to do more, to have more impact in the world. And so you have two choices in that moment of the loss. You can either decide to give up, or you could decide to get up. And I decided I was going to get up. I was going to do what God had called me to do. And he had to position me so that I could receive his blessing that he had in store for me. But I didn't know at the time it was a blessing, but I was trusting that if I wanted a radical blessing in my life, I needed to do something radically different. And participating in that 40-day fast did that for me, because it stripped me of all the things I was controlling, and I surrendered it all for the first time in my adult life to God and allowed him to lead me. And he has led me through those challenges. So when you asked me, how do I face the challenges every day? I first give honor to God for the life that I have, because every day that I wake up means that there is still an assignment and a work for me to do. And because of that, I refuse to waste my years holding on to what was and just stepping into what is, so that I could be ready and positioned for what's out there for me for my tomorrow.
What a powerful story. It's you're about to make me cry here, because I can identify with you so well. You don't know this about me, and I don't know if you checked my background out or not, but I was finished law school, uh, started practicing law,
Okay.
practiced law for about 10 years, became
Mhm.
a gambler, and ended up robbing a bank. And of
Mm,
course, I spent 5 years in prison. And I came out, went to a seminary and
mm.
received my Master's of Divinity and my D.Min. And 2 years after that, I was called to the church that I just retired from. Was there
Wow.
for 30, almost 32 years. And
Wow.
so I know what you mean about falling down and have to get up.
Yeah.
And so it was touching to me. So I understand exactly uh, where you are. Listeners,
Yeah.
listeners don't go into place because Sonja's going to come back and share more of her story with us. But first of all, Sonja, can you tell us where we can learn more about you, your podcast? I know you're an author. If you have a book that you want to talk about, or can tell us where we can purchase your book, or any information that you can give to listeners of this podcast.
Absolutely. Well, as James said, I am a podcaster. So I'm the host of Inspiring Nations with Sonja Keefe podcast show. And you can get that podcast wherever you download your podcast. I'm on Apple, Spotify, all the major podcast platforms. And for more information about me, you can visit my website at www.sonjakeeve.com. That's SONJAKEE, B as in Victor Eve.com. And I'm on all social media on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram at Sonja Keefe.
Beautiful, beautiful. Listeners, I hope you all hear that and that you will consider listening to Sonja's podcast and and getting more information about her from what she has just shared. Sonja, again, let me just move forward because you've given us some great information. You may have talked about your purpose and how you
Mhm.
find your purpose.
Yeah,
And I think the 40 days fasting was probably the big part of this. Am I correct about that?
absolutely.
Okay,
Absolutely.
okay. And since you're into podcasting, I'm very interested in this part myself. What are some challenges to podcasting?
Definitely, it's the biggest challenge is mindset of people really understanding, can I do this? And so I tell people there's 3 C's you need to really consider. You need to consider one, being very clear on who is your ideal audience. Like, who is it that you're here to serve? What is it that you want listeners to walk away with as a result of listening to your show? So understanding that target market really becomes the first place, because with podcasting, while your show impacts millions, when you're creating your content for your show, you need to be very clear on how your content is going to really help that listener take the next step. Because where podcasters are, I mean, where listeners are consuming podcasts now more than ever, is because they're looking for solutions. They need kind of that next step. They need that inspiration. They need that encouragement. And so your podcast show can be the very thing that can do that. So you have to be very clear on, who you're talking to. The next thing is being consistent. That is a challenge for many podcasters, especially when they first get into the space. Like, you're super excited about, creating your show and the impact it's going to be, but now you've got to consistently keep showing up. Because with your podcast show, especially if you are a solo podcaster, you're the one that has to steer that ship. So you're the one that has to show up each and every time and be committed to dropping your episodes when you say you're going to do it. So if you have a weekly show, say if it's every Wednesday, like Inspiring Nations comes on every Wednesday. So every Wednesday, I have to make sure I have a show, even if my guest cancels at the last minute. Always have what I say, your pocket talk, your back pocket talk ready to go. Because people, as they start learning that you have a podcast show, you start getting what I call raving fans. And so when they're tuned into you, if you have a show that's weekly, but you don't show up until once a month, you start losing your listeners. So being consistent And then lastly, being committed to the process, because this is a long game. Like people think when they get into podcasting, oh, I'm going to have millions of followers and everybody's going to like me. No, you have to always be committed to why you started this podcast. And that's why I always say, start with the mindset. Why do you want to do this? Because there will be times where you don't feel like doing a show. Life happens. You might have a bad day. I cannot tell you how many times during the week I've had a rough day in the office, but when it was time to do that show on Wednesday nights at 7 p.m., I had to have the energy ready to go and be committed to that process, because on the other side of that podcast is somebody who's tuning in who needs some inspiration, who needs to be educated. They want their lives to be transformed. And so the women and men who come on to Inspiring Nations and share their stories, I have to be committed to making sure I have the right guests, because not everybody's going to be a good fit for your show. Because once you start a podcast, everybody and their grandmother wants to come onto a podcast, but you have a very specific audience that you're trying to reach, and you don't want to bring just anybody onto your show. And so I've had to turn people away just based upon, what they decided they wanted to talk about, or if they just wanted to simply advertise their books or their services. That's not what that show's about for me. That show is, there's something, I interview women from around the world that have stories of how they inspire others every day. And so I'm looking for them to share their wisdom, their takeaways, their transformation, their trials on the show, because somebody is looking for what they have. They need what they have. And so when I interviewed a woman whose daughter committed suicide and now was tasked with having to raise her granddaughter in her later years. She had to find her purpose in the midst of her pain. Well, guess what? Somebody has just lost their child or had to bury their child, and they're like, you know what? I don't know if I can go on. But believe it or not, you can still go on. The pain never goes away, but you can find purpose in that and help the next mother who may experience that, you know what, you can still find joy, even though you have just experienced something so horrific as the loss of your own child. You can now breathe and birth something beautiful inside of you, because like the word says, God will give you beauty for your ashes. And so those types of things is what I did for my show. So you've got to be clear. You've got to be consistent, and then you've got to be committed. And when you can be clear on those 3 C's in life as it relates to your podcast, you will have a show that will outlast years.
I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say. You have truly blessed us today, and I'm just so thankful that you agreed to just share. There's just one little question,
Yeah.
because people want to know this, especially people who going into podcasting. Can you make any money? Can you make any money in podcasting?
Yes, you can make money, and understand that sponsorships is not the only way to make money. People get into podcasting thinking you can make money. Now, what I will tell you, it is not a gold mine. It's not going to make you a millionaire. If you get into podcasting, for the sole purpose of making money, you will not be a podcaster for very long. Podcasting is the long game. There are ways to leverage your gifts, your talents, and your services by having a podcast. And one of the free ways that you can monetize almost instantly is by sharing on your show your books, your products, your services that you have, because statistics have shown that 54% of podcast listeners have admitted to buying a product or service that they heard on an actual podcast show. And so I tell podcasters, leverage this beautiful tool, your podcast show, to talk about the things that you're doing. So if you've just dropped a new book, or you're speaking at an event, or you're preaching at an event, use your podcast show to say and tell your audience the things that you've got going on. And what happens is, you use their podcast show to tell them, after you've listened to the show, go visit my website and give them the website address, because what will happen is you take your audience from your show to another place where they can learn more about you, they can work with you, they can buy your products and services. And this was one of the ways I was able to leverage monetization strategies. I got paid speaking engagements because of the podcast show. I was able to sell my books because of my podcast show, because I opened my mouth, advertised my products and services, and was able to monetize on that right away. As you continue to grow the show and you're offering value and people are getting the transformation, that's what attracts sponsorships. So it's not always that it's going to happen instantaneously. So that's why I said you need to be in this industry for the commitment. You need to be committed to being able to change lives, and then the rest follows. So to answer your question, yes, you can monetize. Sponsorship is not the only way. It is a way, but if you're getting to this for the sole purpose of making money, you will not be podcasting long.
Well, there you have it. Sonja Keefe, who in the midst of her pain discovered her purpose and found her voice.
Yes.
She created in 2020 Sisters with a Voice podcast network, where she helps women from around the world to create their own authentic voice through the power of creating their own podcast shows in just 30 days. What a powerful story. We have heard from Sonja Keefe today, and we are so grateful for her sharing with us.